I was a rabbi in Miami. I used to give my drushes on Shabbos morning. And one Sunday morning, one of my congregants said to me, "Rabbi, you should know I didn't sleep all Saturday night because of your drusha." I said, "I'm very flattered that it made such an impression on you that it didn't let you sleep all night." He said, "Not exactly. It's just whenever I sleep in the daytime, I have a hard time sleeping at night." I learned from that I have the power to put people to sleep when I speak. These are challenging and stressful times, and I'm sure that Rabbi Grunberger invited you here to get a little rest. So if I accomplish that, I will be very happy. If you are hardcore insomniacs and won't be able to sleep during this, you're going to have to listen to some Divrei Torah. I want to first dedicate the merit of the Torah words that we're going to speak for the safety of the Chayalim in Gaza, for a refuah shlema for those who need to be healed, and as a merit to the souls of those who fell. It says, Eish tzara hi liYaakov, it's a time of difficulty, calamity for Klal Yisrael, umimena yivosheya. But we are guaranteed that we will come out of those tzaras. That's a simple meaning. The real and deeper meaning is from the tzara itself, if you use it properly, if you know how to use times, challenging times properly, that in itself will create the Yeshua, will create the salvation. It says in Mishlei, Sheva yipol tzadik v'kom. A tzadik can fall 7 times and get up. We normally think that despite the fact that he falls 7 times, he's still able to get up. But the truth is, because he falls, that in itself gives him the power to be able to persevere and to get up. It's sometimes the difficult times in life, the trying times in life, that really give a person strength and give him direction and enable him to come out of it even stronger than he went in. So that's what I would like to discuss tonight, how we can make the most and how to have the proper perspective on the challenging and difficult times that we are experiencing here in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam, in his introduction to the laws of fast days, says that there is a mitzvah from the Torah that applied when we had a temple, when we had a Beis HaMikdash, to blow trumpets whenever there were calamities and tragedies that occurred, or that we were commemorating tragedies or calamities that happened in the past that were not yet corrected, like we are mourning for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and commemorating those tragedies now on Tisha B'Av. The Rambam says there's a mitzvah to blow trumpets and to cry out to God. And the purpose of that is to be aware that nothing in this world happens by coincidence, by happenstance. Everything is directed by God, and there's a reason for everything. There's a reason why tragedies occur. There's a reason why difficult times come. And basically the idea is that if things are not okay spiritually, then the physical, material situation mirrors the spiritual situation and expresses it. And when things are not perfect, are imperfect, spiritually, that leads to imperfections in the physical world too. And therefore, the way to remedy those difficult times and to remedy those tragedies is to correct the spiritual situation. And then the physical situation will also hopefully be corrected. And therefore, when a person blows those trumpets and cries out to God, he recognizes the fact that he has to change. Something has to happen. And if he'll change in a positive way, then maybe the situation will also change in a positive way. And I was thinking that there are two ideas here. One is the blowing of trumpets, and the other one is to call out to God from the recesses of your heart. The trumpets were blown in the desert when they wanted to gather the people together. And therefore, there is a communal way of crying out to God. That's through the trumpets. And then each individual personally has to cry out in their own personal, individual way from the recesses of their own personal heart. So there are communal ways of dealing with tragedies and difficulties, and then there are individual ways. And we'll speak about both of them. The Gemara says, Im roe adam sheyisurim boyim olav. If someone sees that he's beset with suffering, with calamity, then what should he do? Yemashmesh b'maisav, yefashpesh b'maisav. Yefashpesh b'maisav, yemashmesh b'maisav. The Mesilas Yesharim says, what are these two ideas? You should investigate your deeds and see what you can correct and improve. The Mesilas Yesharim says, yefashpesh means to look for things that need correcting, negative things that you can correct. Yemashmesh means take a look at the things that are good that you do and see if you can improve them. Those are the two ideas. I was thinking of a little bit different idea. Yefashpesh, the word pishpush, means a small, very small window. There were pishpashim in the Beis HaMikdash, small windows, small doorways, very small areas. The first thing a person has to do is focus in and pinpoint specific things that he knows that he can correct or improve. Very specific actions. But that's not where it ends. After you pinpoint certain specific areas, you mashmesh, pick them up and see what causes those deficiencies. See what kind of character traits perhaps led to those deficiencies. Behavior is dependent on a lot of roots, character traits, various other things. So after you've pinpointed certain kinds of behavior that are negative or that can be improved, then look and see what the roots of them are and work on the roots also. That's yemashmesh b'maisav. And it's interesting, the rabbis say, what if you investigated all your deeds and you didn't find anything? Then yitlein bebittul Torah. Then you should attribute it to the fact that you were derelict in learning Torah. So everybody asks, not learning Torah is one of the biggest sins. How could you have investigated everything and found nothing, and then you have to attribute it to not learning Torah? That in itself is a sin. They say what it means is something else. If you investigated all your deeds and couldn't find anything wrong, it's not because you haven't done anything wrong or don't need improvement. It's because you don't know what's wrong, and you don't know what there is to improve. So if you learn a little bit more Torah, you'll find out what there is to improve and what there is to correct, and then you'll reinvestigate your deeds and find that there's a lot of things to find in all of us. So that is the first line of action. Let's see what we can improve. And because we live in a world where there are no prophets, no one can tell you exactly why tragedies occur or why things are not the way they should be. The only thing we can do is speak in general. A person can't pinpoint unless a prophet comes and tells you that God told him this, and we don't have any prophets today. It says that after prophecy ceased, it was given to children and to fools. And therefore, if anybody over bar mitzvah tells you something that you need a prophet to tell, you know what he is. So we can't attribute, this is why this tragedy happened, but we can in general say, if tragedies, if difficulties are occurring, then something is wrong spiritually, and this is a physical manifestation of that spiritual state. And therefore, in general, we should look for those kinds of things that we can improve and use it as a wake-up call to try to change our situation spiritually so the situation can be changed physically also. Let's see some of the things that we can take negatives of a very difficult situation and turn them into something positive. You know, you can't control the situations that come to you in life. That God controls. What we can control is how we relate to them, what perspective we have on them, how we use them, either negatively or positively. One of the things that everyone, I think, is aware of is that life is very transient, and we are all very vulnerable, and we're mortal. The more we hear of reports of this one who was killed, or that one who was killed, Rahman al-Islam, or this one who was wounded, or that one was wounded, or all the threats to the country, to the population, whether it's close by or far away, makes no difference because we're all one soul and everything is close by. So it makes a person remember that he's mortal. It reminds us that we're not here forever, and life is very vulnerable. And that can be a very positive thought, or it can be a very negative thought. The Gemara says, La'olam yargiz adam yetzer hatov al yetzer hara. A person should always agitate his good inclination over his evil inclination. He should make sure that he does good things, and by overpowering his evil inclination, we all have an evil inclination, we have a good inclination, overpower the evil with the good and do good things. If you're successful, fine. What if you're not successful? So then the next line of action is learn some Torah. Torah is an antidote to the Yetzer Hara, to the evil inclination. If you're successful, fine. If that doesn't work, then read the Shema. And that will help you to overcome your evil inclination. If that doesn't help, then remember the day of death. Remember that you are mortal and that one day you're not going to be here. That always bothered me. If remembering the day of death is going to do the trick, why beat around the bush? Just get to the point, right? Instead of learning Torah, you can always learn Torah. You can always read Kriya Shema. But if you want to overpower your evil inclination, and the last resort is remembering the day of death, so don't make it the last resort. Do it right away. I think the reason that you can't do it right away is because remembering that we are mortal can lead to very negative feelings. And first you have to get rid of and negate those negative feelings before you can use the positive feeling of what it means to know that you're mortal. What are the negative feelings? Of a person being scared. Again, we hear of death around us. We hear how vulnerable human life is. And it leads us to many, many different kinds of thoughts. One kind of thought when a person contemplates his mortality is denial. Not going to happen to me. I am in control. I will jog and eat health foods and nothing will ever happen to me. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't jog and you shouldn't eat healthy foods, but never think that that is going to make the difference in your control of your life. I heard that the person who instituted jogging died of a massive heart attack while jogging. So that's not what you can control in this world. It's very proper to do things that are healthy and to do as much as you can to make yourself secure and act safely, right? And do things that are safe. That's what God wants. He wants you to value your life and not to deal with it capriciously. but never think that you're in control. Those things are proper things to do, but they are not guarantees. And therefore, the first thing you should do is Yargiz Yetzer Hatov al Yetzer Hara. Chazal say, the rabbis tell us, that Hakol Bidei Shamayim, everything is in the hands of heaven, except for one thing, Yirah Shamayim. Your moral choices are in your hands. Everything else is not in your hands. Ultimately, God is in control. But one thing God leaves to our control, doing good or bad, making moral choices. That's what we control. So the first thing a person should think of before he contemplates his mortality is realize the only thing you can control in this world is your moral choices, nothing else. So don't contemplate your mortality and be in denial and think that you can control everything. Second thing, the second negative response to contemplating one's mortality is, if that's the case, then nothing's worth anything. Someday I'm going to die anyway, and everything I did is going to go to somebody else, so what's it worth anything? Get up in the morning, pull the covers over your head, and go into a depression, and don't be active at all, because what's anything worth? We're going to die anyway. And that comes the rabbis and say, to counteract and negate that feeling, learn some Torah. You know what Torah tells us? That everything in this world is important, because the Torah directs everything we do. There's a proper way of doing it and an improper way. If it's not important, who in the world cares what you do? But everything's important. Even how you put your shoes on in the morning, which shoe goes first and which one you tie first, is significant. That means that we are extremely important in the scheme of the universe. And what we do is extremely important and has tremendous implications. So life is important. Don't minimize the importance of life because someday you're going to die. Everything you do is eternally and universally important. So that combats, by learning Torah, the Torah assigns values to everything we do. It tells me that life is important. So that combats the second negative response of feeling that nothing's worth anything and a person should go into depression. The third response to contemplating one's mortality is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Might as well enjoy the world since it's a short time that you're here. So eat, drink, and be merry. On that, the rabbis come along and say, read the Shema. The Shema tells us that a person has responsibility, there's reward, there's punishment. A person has to make an accounting to what he does in this world. It's not a free-for-all. After you have negated all the negative responses to contemplating your mortality, now contemplate the fact that you're not here forever. And now you'll come to the positive results of that contemplation. What are the positive results of a person realizing that one day he's no longer to be in this physical world? One positive result is that every second of life is valuable. If something is open-ended and has no limitations and no boundaries, then it's not worth too much. It's the things in the world that are limited that are very, very valuable because they're limited. If life would be unlimited, then what is a second of life worth? But life is not unlimited. We have only a certain amount of seconds to live in this world, and every second is important. But you have to have the right perspective on life to realize how important every second of life is. And there are basically two perspectives on life. There's a very secular perspective on life, which comes in many, many different flavors and apparitions, but they all boil down to the same thing. What I saw on a T-shirt in New York many years ago that they were selling like hotcakes. It had one sentence on it. The one who has the most toys when he dies wins. What does that mean? You're born, eventually you're going to die. You have all your life in between those 2 points. The purpose of life is to have pleasure. Toys are things that you get pleasure from. They can be experiences, things When you're little, the toys are little. When you get bigger, the toys get bigger. And what is a successful life? Whoever has the most toys by the time he dies. Whoever has had the most pleasure, acquired the most things, so he's had a successful life. I was looking for an asterisk for a footnote on that T-shirt. Exactly what do you win at that point since you're no longer here? And then I heard about a woman from Los Angeles who, before she died, asked that she be buried not in a coffin, but in her Rolls Royce. And to the chagrin of her heirs, the court upheld her wishes, and she was buried in her Rolls Royce. She had the biggest toy, the most expensive one. She got to be buried in it. She won. She had a successful life. What exactly she gained at that point, I'm not sure. I'm sure her gas mileage at that point was great because she wasn't going anywhere. If that is one's perspective on life, birth to death, and whatever you can amass pleasure in between, then life is very depressing. And most people come to this understanding about midlife, because you can compare life in that perspective to the following. And please don't leave after I finish this analogy, because I didn't come here to depress you. But this is not our perspective on life. This is not what life is. But if that's your perspective on life, then we can compare it to the following. Imagine a man standing outside the delivery room waiting for news of his wife's impending birth. The doctor comes out and he says, I have very, very sad news for you. Your wife just gave birth to a child, but the child was born with a mortal, terminal disease that it can't survive. Your child's going to die from the disease it was born with. The father says, doctor, give me hope. There's a cure. No, there is no cure. You're looking for a cure. Now, he gave up long ago. Somebody survived this terrible disease miraculously, without a cure. Never. So I never heard of such a terrible disease. There's no cure. You're not looking for a cure. No one ever survived the disease miraculously. What's the name of this terrible disease that my child was born with? He said, the doctor says, you see, when your child was born, he contracted the disease we call life. Some people have survived 80 years, 90 years, 120 years. We don't know how long it's going to take. But we know one thing for sure. Whoever was born and contracted the disease called life eventually died from it. Think about it. Imagine if you knew how many seconds you're going to live. We're all going to live in Mirz Hashem 120 happy, healthy years. Now let's see how many seconds there are in that. Take 120 and multiply it by 365. That's how many days in 120 years. Multiply that by 24. That's how many hours in 120 years. Multiply that by 60 is how many minutes. Multiply that by 60 is how many seconds. Big number. Put it on a digital display. Put it up in the delivery room. And the moment you're born, press the button. What happens? Numbers keep going down. While you're sitting here, the numbers are going down towards zero. That's what life is. You're born, you begin to die, and eventually you die from contracting life when you're born. And the rabbis say that. Rishoyim b'chayehem nikroyim mesim. We normally translate that to mean that wicked people, even when they're alive, are considered dead. But I think it means something else. Rishoyim b'chayehem. Rishoyim as they live, nikroyim mesim, they're called dying, because that's all their life is. They start life at one point, end at another point, and go from that point A to point B. It's all one long death. It's a terminal disease. So what's our perspective on life? Much different. Life doesn't start when you're born, and it doesn't end when you leave this world. This is a very small portion of one's existence. We were created as souls and existed for thousands of years under God's throne, whatever that means, as souls. We could function very nicely as a soul in a spiritual world. We could see without eyes and hear without ears and get around without arms and legs. And God put us in this physical world. We'll see in 1 second why. And then we needed a spacesuit to wear to be able to function. A soul can't function in a physical world without a spacesuit. So we need eyes to see and ears to hear and arms and legs to get around with, like an astronaut. As long as he's on terra firma, he's on the earth, he can function very nicely without any apparatus. But when he goes into outer space, which is not compatible to human beings, there's no oxygen, he needs an oxygen apparatus. There is no air pressure, he needs a pressurized suit. There's no sound waves, he needs to talk through a radio. When he comes back to earth, he takes off the suit. Exactly how we are. We are souls. We existed as souls for thousands of years. We came into this physical world. We need a spacesuit, an inner spacesuit to wear. We need eyes and ears and so on. We go back to the spiritual world, we leave the spacesuit here. Could be for that reason, one of the ways that we express mourning when someone dies is by tearing our clothing, to show it's only the clothing that's been torn away, but the essence of the person still exists. Person's not his body. Person is a soul. The body is merely a suit of clothing that the soul wears to function in this physical world. So why did God create us? Created us as souls, kept us there in the heavens for so many years, and then sent us down here only that we should go back there? So why don't we just stay there? So the rabbis tell us the purpose of creation was God, being the ultimate good, wanted to shower that goodness on a creation that could receive that ultimate goodness, which is himself. So God wanted to create a creation that he could have an intimate relation with eternally. And that is the greatest pleasure that could be. And that is what we call the world to come. Tzaddikim sit, the righteous sit and bask in God's presence. So God could have created our souls, created a relationship with us eternally, and that would have been it. But God knew that people don't appreciate completely what they get on a silver platter. If you earn it, then you appreciate it more. So God said, I'm not going to create this relationship with you. I'm going to put you in a physical world distance from me. You create the relationship instead of me creating it. And if you'll create the relationship, you'll really appreciate it eternally. And it's not that we earn our share in the world to come. We create our share in the world to come. It's a difference. Some people think that we're in this world, it's like a Purim carnival. You go to the Purim carnival, there's games to play. If you're successful and win, you get coupons. At the end of the day, you take your coupons to the prize booth. If you have a lot of coupons, you get a big bear. If you get a little bit of coupons, you get a small bear. The more coupons, the bigger the prize. That's what in this world. This world, there's games to play. They're called mitzvahs. And if you do them right, you get points. Unfortunately, there are games to play where you get demerits. And then after 120 years, they punch your name into this master computer in the heavens, and they add up all your points, subtract all your demerits, give you a coupon, go cash it in for your share in the world to come. It doesn't work like that, because that wouldn't be the ultimate pleasure. Give me an example. Imagine if you wanted one of these very plush, comfortable, reclining chairs, and you were hoping that your Aunt Matilda would give it to you for your birthday. And Aunt Matilda comes through and she gives you the chair and you sit in it. You'd appreciate it. You'd enjoy it. But what happens if Aunt Matilda decided to give you a sweater instead? And you still want that chair. And you don't have the money. So you go to work for a month to earn enough money to buy the chair. And at the end of the month, after working 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and earning enough money to buy the chair, you finally buy this chair. And now you sit in it. Do you think you'd appreciate it more? Of course. What you earned, you appreciate more than what you got for free. But what happens if they don't sell the chair? You have to plant trees, nurture them until you can cut them down and take them into lumber, make the frame of the chair, mine iron, make nails, and hammer it together, raise sheep, shear their wool for the stuffing of the chair, raise cotton, spin it into thread and upholstery of the chair, and now you sit in the chair. Think you'd appreciate it even more? Of course. You created it. So what you get for free, you don't appreciate as much as what you earn. What you earn, you don't appreciate as much as what you create. And therefore God said, I'm putting you in a world and you create the relationship with me. You make your souls more godlike, you'll have a closer relationship to me eternally. You make your souls less godlike, you'll have less of a relationship. How do you know what to do, what's godlike? So we have a Torah that gives us examples of what kinds of things are godlike and what kinds of things are ungodly. But it's not just the Torah. It's not just mitzvahs. It's everything you do in life, every area of life, every second. How you eat, how you drink, how you sleep, how you conduct your married life, your social life. Everything, everything, even the entertainment that you have can be done in a godly way or can be done in an ungodly way. If you do it in a godly way, you make your soul more godly. and after 120 years, you have a closer relationship to God. You make your soul less godly, you have less of a relationship. It's up to you. You're creating it. And you can do it every second. The rabbis tell us there was an infamous sinner who in the midst of a sin, something happened that shocked him to repent. And his repentance was so intense that he died. And a heavenly voice resounded, Ashrecha Rebbe Lezer ben Durdoi shemesukin la'olam haba. How fortunate you are that you are destined for the world to come. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah, heard this story, he cried. And he said, Yesh kona olamo b'sha'ah achas. A person can acquire his world to come in 1 second. So the Telzer Rosh Hashiva asks, what was he crying about? He should have been ecstatic. You can get your world to come in 1 second. What's the cry about? He said, because he realized you could do that every second. In mathematics, there is an infinite amount of whole numbers. You can always add another whole number. But there's also an infinite amount of fractions between every 2 whole numbers. So in mathematics, there's an infinite amount of infinities. So in the world to come, there can be an infinite amount of eternities. There's no limit. Every second you can create more and more eternity. And therefore, how many seconds do we let slip through our fingers and we create nothing? That's something to cry about. In fact, if you have this perspective on life, every second of life in this world is intrinsically important. If you have the other perspective on life, there is no second of life that's important at all. Because if you have 1 second to live, what kind of pleasure? How many toys can you get in a second? Can you eat a steak in a second? No. So 1 second of life is not important. You need a lot of seconds, but that's not enough either. Because you could be 19 years old and have a lot of seconds to go, but Rahman al-Itzlan, right, you're in a coma in the hospital. So your quality of life is almost zero. So in order for life to be important, according to the first philosophy, you need quantity and quality. That gives life importance. But there's no intrinsic importance to any second of life. From the Torah standpoint of what life is all about, every second as a second, on any level, is internally important. You could be in the hospital in a coma and be 119 and a half. 3/4, 7/8, doesn't make a difference how much. And you can still think, and it doesn't make a difference what the EEG says, flat brain waves, doesn't mean you're not thinking. It could either mean that the machine is not sensitive enough to pick up the thinking, and in 20 years when they make a more sensitive machine, they'll apologize for pulling the plug, or it means that you are not thinking with your brain. Your brain's out of commission. Just like the astronaut, his radio may be broken. That doesn't mean he can't talk. He just can't talk in the venue that he's in. So a person can think with his soul, even if his brain is not functioning, as long as he's still alive. So what? You can think. You can think about repenting. You can think about doing good things. You can think about things that are good things themselves. And in 1 second, on any level, you can get eternity. So that is one thing to think about. If we realize that life is short, we're not here forever, we're here for a purpose, and every second of life can be translated and transformed into eternity, then life is very important. Make the most of it. Make the most of every second. That is a positive response to recognizing the fact that we are mortal. There's another positive response, and that is humility, being a humble person. It says that a person should be very, very humble. Shetikvas enosh rima. If you think about the fact that one day, right, you're not going to be here, and you're going to be the victim of worms in the ground, how could a person be a haughty person? So that leads a person to humility, and humility leads you to all the good character traits. It's the foundation of everything good in this world, being a humble person. What does that mean, being humble? Thinking you're a nobody? No. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person who ever existed. If he thought he was a nobody, he was a fool. Not only that, he wasn't even allowed to think he's a nobody. It was a mitzvah to believe that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet that ever existed, and that mitzvah applied to Moshe too. He had to believe he was the greatest prophet. So what does humility mean? What does it mean to be humble? Humble means the following, that I believe that as a human being, physically, I'm really not that important. I'm going to end up in the ground someday. But God invested in me a soul and tremendous potential. And he gave me character traits. He gave me abilities, capabilities, and talents. And that gives me responsibility to use them and to bring them to their fruition and potential. There's a difference. The recognizing one's self-worth is the foundation, says the Rabbeinu Yonah, of all service to God. That you recognize how important you are. Self-esteem. Because if you don't think you're important, if you think you're worth nothing, then why in the world would God want a worthless thing to serve him? So why would you have any incentive to serve God? Who am I anyway? And not only that, if you think you're worthless and good for nothing, then why would you feel guilty if you did good for nothing things? Good for nothing things. Do good for nothing things. When we confess our sins, we end off, Avarnu ha-mitzvosecha u'mishpatecha hatovim, we transgressed your good laws, v'lo shava lanu. Simple meaning, it wasn't worth it. We thought we'd gain from all these sins, and in the end, lo haya shaveh, it wasn't worth it. The Telzer Rosh Hashiva of Elimeir Bloch Zatzal says it means something else. Lo shava lanu means it wasn't befitting to me. In Yiddish, we say, nicht von mir zugepasst, meaning the following. I did all these terrible things. If that's what I'm capable of doing, then what am I confessing? That's me. But if I am potentially able to do much better things, then I can feel guilty for not living up to my potential. So if a person thinks he's worthless, he's good for nothing, then why would he want to serve God, and why would he want to act in a positive way? He's nothing anyway. And therefore, having self-esteem and understanding who you are and what your capabilities are, is utmost importance as a foundation for service of God. So what's the difference between that and being a haughty person? The difference, I think, is in the following two sentences. Haughtiness is, I'm important because I made myself important, and that gives me rights. And self-esteem is, I'm important because God made me important, and that gives me responsibility. The only difference. Same feeling, completely different perspective. And when a person realizes that he's mortal, and that one day he's not going to be here, so the rabbis tell us in Pirkei Avos, Histakel b'shlosha dvarim v'iyatoboli de'avera. Consider and contemplate three things, you won't sin. Damei ayin basa, know where you came from. Ula'ana taholech, and where you're going to. And lifnei mi ata osid litein din v'cheshbon. Then it continues, it tells you what. Where'd you come from? From a drop. Where are you going to? To a place of worms. And you're going to have to give an accounting before God. So the Alshich says, we're talking about two different things over here. That's why it repeats it. Where you came from as a soul, you came from under God's throne. You're very important. Where you're going to as a soul is going back into God's domain. And you're going to have to give an accounting and be rewarded for every good thing you did in this world. As a human being, physically, you came from a drop, you're going to worms, and you're going to have to give an accounting for everything that you didn't do properly. So a person has to realize that on the one hand, he has to have humility, because what am I? What am I as me is just a body that eventually is going to fall apart. But as what God invested in me, and he gave me a soul, and he gave me abilities and capabilities and talents, I have tremendous potential. I have a responsibility to bring out that potential. So therefore, remembering one's mortality has two positive effects. One is to make us appreciate the value of every second of life, because it's not open-ended, and life is therefore very, very precious. Make the most of every second. And the second thing is to feel humility and to feel the responsibility to make every second count and bring out your potential. Another positive response to tragedy, to difficulties, is becoming a very great person. What defines a great person? So the Torah tells us Moshe Rabbeinu was a little boy and he grew up. Torah says, Vayigdal hayeled, the child grew up physically. And then the Torah repeats, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew up. Says the Ramban, the first one was physically. Moshe Rabbeinu grew up physically. He matured physically. The second one is he matured emotionally. He became a great person. What defined greatness? So Torah tells us. Vayetze el Echav, he went out to his brethren, Vayar b'sivlosam, and he saw their suffering. And Rashi says, Nosan einav v'libo lios meitzar aleim. He put his eyes and his heart to suffer with them. That's a great person. A great person is someone who goes beyond himself, doesn't look at himself as from his toes to his head, but he feels that he's part of everyone else. That makes him a great person. I'm not just little me, from my toes to my head, but I'm encompassed, I'm part of everyone. And the more people I feel I'm part of, certain people understand that their spouse is part of them. When they're concerned about their spouse, they're not selfish, concerned about themselves. They're not concerned about somebody else. They're concerned about themselves. But themselves is two bodies. Some people understand their children are actually part of them. When they're concerned about their children, that's self-concern. They're a little bit bigger. Some people understand all their relatives, their extended family is part of them. That's self-concern for them. Some people go beyond that. They realize their entire neighborhood is part of them. And that's self-concern. Some people understand their entire city, country, all of the Jewish people, all of the world is part of me. That's a great person. A person who can empathize. We call that binosei ba'ol. He can carry the burden of someone else and feel their pain and feel their joy as if it's mine, because I feel part of everyone else. And therefore, when there are difficult times, and we may not be suffering as much as the people in the South are suffering, and they're not suffering as much as the soldiers on the front. But if I can feel their pain, I can feel what they're going through, and I can make it something that is part of me, then I've gained something. I become a greater person because of that. In addition to that, a person has to therefore feel unity, because we're all in this together. And if I can feel your pain and your joy, then I can unite with you and feel and experience who you are and give you that importance, and you can feel that about me. That's what real unity is. And in that respect also, a person can reach another level, and that's called hakaras hatov, gratitude, recognizing good, and having gratitude to those people who are benefiting you. And that specifically applies to the chayalim, soldiers who are there on the front, putting their lives in danger for what? That we should be able to be secure. That's all. If they weren't there, we'd have thousands of these less than animals. I don't want to disgrace and insult animals by calling these terrorist animals. Animals it would be a disgrace to the animals to call them that. Animals protect their children. Animals don't throw their children in front of them. Animals are not, most of the time, cruel for the sake of being cruel. And these human beings who are subhuman, right, are worse than that. But they'd be infiltrating, we know what their plans were. If we didn't have people, right, protecting us, then who knows what would be. And no one should say, well, God protects us. He does. But he expects us to make our hishtadlus, to put in our effort. It's no different than going to a doctor, and people have gratitude to doctors, right? If that doctor made a successful operation, he gave you a successful treatment, right? And because of that, you became well, you thank the doctor 100 times. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, God healed me. He did. But the doctor was the means that God used to heal you, and you have to go through that means. Right? Same thing goes that if you earn a living and you thank your employer, right, for giving you a paycheck, but God is the one who gives you a living, that's true. But the employer is the one who comes through. You have to have gratitude to him too. Everything in life is like that. There's no idea not to have gratitude towards the chayalim who are fighting, even though ultimately it's God who is the one who protects us, but he chooses to do it through our means and through our natural hishtadlus, what we do on our own. And for that, you need an army. For that, you need soldiers. And you have to be thankful to those people who are putting their life on the line, right? And for us, that's for sure. No shaila about that. You also have to be thankful to the people who are putting their life on the line spiritually, because the soldiers could not be successful unless we had some spiritual merits also and some spiritual power. So the same way that we have tremendous gratitude to the soldiers who are protecting us physically, you have to have gratitude to people who are sitting and learning Torah, right? And perhaps giving up a lot of the pleasures of this world to be able to devote themselves to Torah and give that merit to the Jewish people of learning Torah. So you have to have gratitude. In fact, on Shabbos, we say a special Mishaberach after Kriyas HaTorah for the soldiers and for the people learning Torah. We put them together. We say that Mishaberach Avoseinu Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe Aaron David Shlomo, right? Who Yishmor, right? V'yatzliach es Chayolei Tzahal Hagonas Yisrael, right? Tzva, right? The army. The Elu Shalomdim Yeshivos Ubekolalim Shalomdim Al Mishmar Tzeinu, who are protecting us. Both of them. These are protecting us physically. These are protecting us spiritually. Put them together. So in any case, that is also something that a person has to get from this tragedy, to realize that we're in a difficult situation. Because of that, we need people who will help to secure us and protect us, and at least have some gratitude to them. Feel what they're going through and be appreciative of what they're going through, right? They're not sitting here talking. They are on the front lines in tremendous danger, not in a nice situation with the air conditioning on over here. Feel that. Feel what they're going through. I think during the 6-Day War, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz got up in the Mir Yeshiva, and he said, any young man here who's sitting and learning Torah, who doesn't feel that he is on the front spiritually, like those soldiers who are on the front, and therefore there's no taking breaks and no resting. You sit and learn here until you fall off your feet from exhaustion, like a soldier in the battlefront. And if you can't do that, you don't belong here. So we have to feel that if we're not on the front, then at least we are together with them spiritually, feeling what they're feeling, and feeling that we are at least partners with them, and at least have gratitude to what they're doing. I want to end with something that I saw years ago. Something happened in Matityahu maybe about 20 years ago. It was during one of the intifadas. And a family didn't live on the Moshav, but they had come. It was Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah was on a Sunday. This was Shabbos Chol HaMoed Sukkos. And they came on Friday because they were going to a yishuv nearby. I don't know if it was Dolev or Telmon, one of those yishuvim. And because of the intifada, it was dangerous to travel on those roads. So they came and parked their car in Matityahu and took a protected vehicle that took them to Dolev or to Telmon, wherever they were going. On Motzei Shabbos, when they came back, some Arabs, Yimach Shemon v'Zichram, had put up a bomb on the road that they ignited when they came through and pulled the string, and the bomb exploded and the car went up in flames, and they were able to get everybody out of the car except one woman who couldn't get out, and she died in that car. Hoshana Rabbah night, Motzei Shabbos, Hoshana Rabbah night, the day before Simchas Torah. And the people on the Moshav obviously went to help. Right, it was right in our Moshav. That's where they parked the car. That's where they came to get it. And it was a very, very traumatic Hoshana Rabbah. And the next day was Simchas Torah. How in the world do you dance and rejoice after this tragedy happened so close to our homes? I found a medrash that I spoke about that Simchas Torah night. The medrash says like this. The Medrash says that, what are we so happy on Simchas Torah? He says, the whole week of Sukkot, we bring 70 sacrifices for the sake of the nations of the world. And really, by the time Sukkot is over, they should love us. We really did so much for them. We prayed for them. We brought sacrifices to them to make them successful, to protect them. And they should love us for it. And they hate us. And therefore, we should be happy on Simchas Torah. What in the world? That's why we should be happy, because they hate us? I think what it means is the following. If the hatred of the nations of the world, and it's not all the nations of the world, and it's not all Goyim. They're very fine non-Jews in this world. But a good portion of them, all you have to do is look at the newscasts of what's going on in France or Germany or in America and other places in the world, right? It's not just that they have bleeding hearts for these poor Palestinians, but they hate Jews. If it would be rational, be a rational hatred, so then something's wrong with us and we should feel terrible. But if after everything it's irrational, what do we do? We're the victims over here. The people shooting rockets at our population, right? And we're being accused of war crimes because we shoot back. And we're not exactly careful 100%, we try to be, that maybe some of these innocent people who are human shields and who are accomplices to all of this, they voted these people in. Maybe some of them, God forbid, should be killed, right? It's mind-boggling to think how the world totally distorts what's going on over here. And the victims become the perpetrators, and the perpetrators become the victims. So it's irrational, completely irrational. So then why? Why do they hate us? Because there's something very special about us which evil can't take. Evil can't take righteousness, and impurity can't take purity. It's a natural part of the world. And if these non-Jews hate us irrationally, then it means there's something special about us. Because if it wasn't irrational, there may be something wrong with us, but it's not us. It's something about us that these evil people can't take. And that's why they hate us. And if you understand that, then you are proud of who you are. You should always be proud. It's better to be the victim than to be perpetrators like that, right? By the concentration camps, there was a great rabbi who said openly to a Nazi, he said, I'd rather be the victim and go to the gas chambers, but never trade places and be what you are. So we should be proud of who we are and what we are, right? And sometimes the irrational hatred of the nations of the world brings us to understanding that there's something special about us that we may have missed had it not been for that incentive. So all of these things, and a lot more, a person should realize that tragedies are tragedy, and we're supposed to cry about them, and we're supposed to pray that they go away. But until they go away, a person's supposed to realize that everything that happens in this world happens because God wants it to happen, and it's for a good purpose eternally. We don't see it in the small perspective that we see things only very partial, fragmented. If we see the whole picture, the eternal picture, we'd see how it fits in for the good. Just want to end with one mashal to that, because it's important to understand that everything that's happening ultimately is for the good, except we have to relate to it and hope to try to change it. If we change ourselves, then the good can happen in bitter ways, or the good can happen in sweet ways. We'd rather happen in sweet ways than in bitter ways. The Gemara says, Ein Tzur Kelokeinu, there's no rock like God. And the Gemara says, don't read rock, tzur, but sayar. There's no artist like God. Shaga Feivel Mendelovich, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Torah V'das about 70, 80 years ago, he said what it means is the following. So if you take a kindergarten child and you tell him to draw the picture of a person standing in front of him, what does he do? Draws a circle for the head, a line down is the body, 2 lines out are the arms, 2 lines down are the legs, 2 dots for the eye, a dot in the middle for the nose, big smile, and he's finished. And you know what he's drawing every second along the way. Tell Rembrandt to draw the same person. So Rembrandt dabs a little red paint over here, a little black paint over there. Somebody who knows nothing about art will say, Mr. Rembrandt, you just ruined this canvas, right? Red paint, black paint. I'll bring you another one, start with the circle, and let's get this finished. You know what Rembrandt will say? This painting's going to take me 6 months. Have a seat and a little patience, and don't ask me any questions until you see the whole painting. When you see the whole painting, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. What are you going to see when the painting's finished? The red paint was for contrast, and the black paint was for a shadow, and everything fits in beautifully to this painting. But as it was being painted and you didn't see the whole picture, you thought that this was destructive. God is painting a panorama of history. And he has a plan, and he knows what the picture's supposed to look like. And we're in the middle of that painting, and we see black blotches and red blotches and terrible tragedies. But if we'd see the whole picture, if we'd see eternity, we'd know that somehow these things fit in to God's plan, and it's all for the good. So if we understand that perspective, on the one hand, to have bitachon, have trust in God. Trust doesn't mean that God's going to do what I want. It means that whatever God does is for the best. Gam zu l'tova. And while we see it as tragedy, and we have to deal with it as tragedy, and cry about it and pray that it should change, we still have that faith that ultimately it's for the good. And while we see the tragedy, at least take what you can from those tragedies and make the best of it. And many of the things that I mentioned are some of the points that a person can think about and make the best out of a bad situation and use it for self-growth, for becoming unified one with the other, for appreciating your own life and the life of others and appreciating what other people are doing for you. And then we become better people, and when the situation becomes better spiritually, then God willing, it'll become better physically also. We'll see a Yeshua, a salvation from all of these sorrows. We'll see the end of all wars. We'll see ultimately the full redemption of the Jewish people with the building of the third Beis HaMikdash, B'vias Goel Tzedek Meher of Yomeinu.